Welcome, Dr. Jason Gulya.
Hi everyone, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. So first I want to start with a question. Who here has never used ChatGPT before? Cool. Who here has used it a couple of times? Okay. And who here uses it all the time? All right, cool. So kind of leaning towards the all the time, but very much a mixture. And I'll try to keep that in mind as I go forward. So I'm going to think about something specific. And I'm going to try not to be super positive or super negative, just describing it in a neutral way. I'm going to think about the hyper-personalization of education and of learning, because that in many ways I think is what is happening. And AI like ChatGPT or whatever programs you know of is a part of that larger process. So first, and we'll see if this actually goes. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about my first experience with ChatGPT. So ChatGPT came out in November, so it's been with us for just about a year, a little bit less. And I came across it a couple of days after it was released. And I played with it for a little bit, maybe about 15, 20 minutes, and my wife was on the other side of the table. And I said to her, the worst thing just happened. I found out how everyone is going to cheat and everyone is going to get an A in all of their college classes. That was my initial response. And I think a lot of us, especially when we look at this technology, have that initial emotional response. And now at this point, I have used this technology for hundreds and hundreds of hours. I've played with it. I've played with different forms of it. And I come from the perspective of an English and writing teacher. So for me, I needed to really shift my perspective. And now, more and more, I see that this technology can be used, if we are very careful with it, to encourage critical thinking, to encourage innovation, right? To encourage just creativity. But I think the first step, at least for me, is to think a little bit less like a professor and a little bit more like a learner. That was a big shift for me. And once I started to do that, and I started to think about what I could actually teach myself by using this technology, that's when things started to shift. So I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, so what I'm going to argue, and I mentioned this already, is that we are at the stage of hyper-personalized learning. Right? And I think this is going to be very much the case over the next probably 3 to 5 years, maybe longer than that. And then I think as AI develops, that's going to change. And one thing that I'll mention now is AI and ChatGPT are really, really young, comparatively speaking. So AI has been around since the 1950s in some form, but it's only really starting to become commercially available and used by everyone. And as things change, how we understand learning and education and college, frankly, is going to change and morph over time. So this is what I'm going to argue, that we are moving into a stage of hyper-personalized learning for better or worse. All right, so what I'm going to do right now, and this is a way to get everyone on the same page a little bit, is I want to show what this feels like. And this is why I have my phone open during a presentation, because I'm going to actually use it. All right, so we're at a stage when, and again, for better or worse, we can bring information to us. All right, so I'm going to show, and hopefully this will work with the mic, I'm going to show a little bit what this is like. Hi, I'm going to give you a basic profile of me. I am a 20-year-old male. All right, I like tennis, baseball, and am sort of into physics, but I'm more and more interested in English and writing. I want you to create a New Yorker-style podcast for me, where you use concrete and specific examples and storytelling. I want you to cater it specifically to me and my profile. Yeah, right. See if we get it.
So you're crafting your own path,
blending sports like tennis and baseball with a growing fascination for physics and a budding passion for English and writing. That's a mix that tells a story of both action and reflection. Let's dive into your New Yorker-style podcast. Title, Court Spaces and Quarks, A Journey into the Physics of Language. Opening music, a light, engaging tune fades in, setting the stage for discovery and insight. Welcome to Court Spaces and Quarks. I'm your host, diving into stories where the momentum of a tennis serve, the strategy behind a baseball pitch, and the curious world of quantum mechanics meet the artistry of the English language. Today.
Great. I didn't really like that. Now this is what I want you to do. I want you to change it up. Make it more story-centered. This time, teach me Newtonian physics, but keep in mind that I love kittens and tennis. Give me at least 3 puns in your New Yorker-style podcast. Hopefully it'll go faster.
All right, let's hit the sweet spot between Newtonian physics and your love for kittens and tennis, wrapped up in a story-rich podcast that serves up a few puns along the way. Title, Fuzzy Balls and Forces, The Tale of Newtonian Tennis. Opening music, a playful, curious melody invites listeners into a world where whimsy meets the laws of motion. Welcome to Fuzzy Balls and Forces, where every leap and bound in the world of kittens mirrors the push and pull of the universe. Today, we're pouncing into
So that gives you a sense of it, right? And the more information I give it, and I could have given it an entire profile. I could have given my bio, right, and given it to the system and have it create more and more and more information. And I can have it take different forms. I chose a New Yorker-style podcast. I could easily have changed it. All right, so now we are at an era where on, say, an hour-long drive, instead of listening to a podcast created by someone else, I can make my own. Right? And I've actually tested this out. I can have it teach something to me. If a question pops up, I say, great, do an episode on that. It becomes a rabbit hole. Right? But it's using AI to give me more and more information. Now, I will say, and this is where I'll hit pause on the technology, that's not entirely a good thing. You will notice it wasn't, and it won't do this. It won't cite its information. It's taken from its data set, which is almost literally just the internet, right? ChatGPT is just, we actually don't know what it's trained on. So it's very hard to figure out what to believe and what not to believe. But I can bring information more and more to myself. And that is what's happening with hyperpersonalization. So in many ways, this is broken up into 3 different parts. So the first is individual paths. So we are going to continue to see, and this is huge for just our personal lives, but also the college classroom, individual paths of learning. So that now we have a way to actually scale personalization. So in a perfect world, at least for me, we'd all have small classes. We would have one-on-ones. We'd be able to have a course that could be as much as possible personalized for us. And that's, in many ways the real draw of something like a seminar or a small class. But in the past, if you had, say, a lecture, and I took a bunch of these as an undergraduate, a lecture with 200 or 300 people, there was no personalization. Typically a lecture delivered to you, you went and took an exam, proved you knew this stuff, and you went on your merry way. We are now starting to see early signs that we might be able to personalize or even hyper-personalize a 300-person lecture. Or, and again, better or worse, an online course with 1,000 students. I think that's going to happen in the future. Right? Very personalized experiences that are entirely virtual. All right, so, and then the other thing that's changing is the accessibility of information. Right? I was able to pull that out and give you a quick demo just from my phone. And this is very much characteristic of technology, just in general, obviously, that we are more and more used to being able to pull up information wherever we are. Now, we are still in the early stages of mobile AI. One of the reasons I think that ChatGPT felt a certain way, especially when it first came out, was that we had to go to a computer to use it. Right? It was very kind of localized. But one of the things that we're going to start seeing going forward is more and more mobile technology. And it's going to be worked into everything. So if you've been following it, Apple is creating their own. One day it's just going to be in your iPhone. You may have noticed it's already coming into your Microsoft. Microsoft Copilot is already here. It's ChatGPT. I went into a PowerPoint slide the other day, and my computer asked me if I wanted it to create a PowerPoint presentation for me. And it's going to cut across programs. It's going to be in Word. It's already in Google Docs. Right? All these different things. So it's going to become more and more accessible. And the information that we get through AI is become more and more accessible. And the other thing, and this should send huge ethical red flags, is the personalization of information. So that we can, and I showed a little example of this with the podcast, it's not like we just go find objective information anymore. We can bring it to us. We can personalize it, right? And there are ways in which that is empowering, and it gives us control over the information that we have access to. But the danger, one of the dangers, are echo chambers. Right? When we do this, when we can bring information to us with ease, even just from our cell phone or whatever other technology we have to be very, very aware that we may not be getting the right information or accurate information. Now, the other thing I'll mention is I mentioned ChatGPT already, and I used it for my demo just because I was able to use it for my mobile device, but there are others too. If you just go online and you look at those giant lists of AI programs that have been released in the last month, it is incredibly overwhelming. There are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of AI programs, right, in addition to ChatGPT. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what AI you're actually using. Because if you go and you use an AI product, odds are it's using something like ChatGPT, it might be using Anthropic's model, whatever program it's using, and it's becoming harder and harder to figure out what that base model actually is. So I have some here, just kind of help you out. So ChatGPT, the real thing is versatility, right? Being able to have it take on a certain role. You can tell it act like a data scientist, right? Act like an artist, act like a professor, and it will take on that role. And it's done a very, very good job actually doing it. Claude has a different feel to it. So the big thing with Claude is you can upload an entire document. You can upload an entire book. You can upload 5 books. And you can ask it to create information with it, right? To create podcasts, to create articles, right? And again, positive and negative here. Right, it's starting to happen, and there are huge benefits to that kind of technology, but huge ethical red flags as well. And then Google Bard, which some of us may have played with, a real benefit of this is it's going to cut across your Google products, right? And this is already free for anyone to use, right? I can go into Google Bard and ask it to actually access my Gmail, access my Google Docs, and move things around for me through all of my Google devices. And so one of the things I think is important to keep in mind is that AI is changing how we see things. And I think this is going to continue to happen. So whether AI is a part of our classes or not, it is going to change the way we interact with data and we interact with information. Because more and more, personalization is going to become the norm. Right? Because it is empowering in some ways despite all of the ethical red flags. And no one really knows what's going to happen to learning over the next 10 years. Right? There are many of these ideas about what it's going to look like, but in the end, many of us are just trying to figure it out as we go along. And no one knows what learning, education, all of the huge, huge things that we really, really believe in is going to look like in 10 years. Because this is a technology that's changing not just how we behave, it's certainly doing that, but how we actually think, how we understand, right? And how we just process information. So one of the last points I want to say, because I do want to bring this to the classroom, is learning communities. I think that in many ways we need to really think about what this kind of personalization means for a learning community, because there are good and bad sides to it. So we do have the ability, or the chance, I guess I'll say, to have tailored learning communities. So that students can work in a small group, right? It's kind of the basic example of this. Working on a project, working on an idea, working on a passion. But there is a big danger here. Right? And this is going to be one of the big things. So if you go and you look at AI products, you will see almost all of them are about hyper-personalization. That's the trend, right? That's the fad, whatever language you want to use. There's very few programs and companies thinking about what that means for the learning community. Personalization, at a certain point, becomes lonely. Right? You can be on your own island. You can look at information in a way that just supports whatever you want to believe. And so I think that as learning institutions and as educators, we need to really think about how to bridge that gap. If the future is hyper-personalization, how can we create communities out of that? And for me, that's one of the biggest questions for colleges and educators and also students right now. If you're a student and you are using something like ChatGPT or any AI program to personalize information, how do you then enter a community? I think that question, or the answer to that question, is going to change as we go forward. And one of the last things I want to say is just the need for balance. I do think there's a way to bring the learning situation or the learning experience to the student and have communities of practice and learning communities, but I think it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of reflection to actually do that. And also, I'll say a lot of experimentation. That one of the things I really want faculty members to do in general, actually just people to do in general, is experiment with this technology. See what you can do with it, see what the dangers are, and then use that information to start to figure out how to create communities if you can. And what this means for the classroom. Now, and I will say that this answer, or my answer, is not going to be the same for everyone, right? Certainly, but this is how I've started to deal with it. So I've worked AI into my curriculum, all right? And that is a personal choice. I don't think that works for everyone. I think that a lot of it comes down to reflection and just thinking about how we want our students to learn and what we want to model for them. But for me, AI is in all of my classes, and I work it in purposefully. And I actually guide my students through ways that something like ChatGPT can be used or should not be used. And I try to be very, very transparent with it. There are ways to use ChatGPT or any AI program to brainstorm, come up with new ideas, whatever your own standards are. And then, at least for me, at a certain point, there are times to dial it back. And I try to guide my students through that process. And the other thing I think is going to be key going forward is going to be AI literacy. We are moving into a world that is going to be hyper-personalized. We are going to see more and more deep fakes. We are going to see these huge ethical quandaries and worries. So AI is a tool that can be used for good or evil. So teaching our students to figure out AI and what's behind it, I think is going to be key. Because I think it's going to be key to just being in the world, because we're just going to interact with AI whether we know it or not. And the last thing I'll say, and this will be focusing on the positive, is there is an opportunity here to think about equity and access. Right? The foundation of equity is personalized support, as much as you can. That every individual has their own personal needs. And by giving them support that is hyper-personalized, we can start to move the needle in that direction. And in the past, especially if you're teaching or taking a 300-person class, that's been extremely difficult to do. Right? And now we're starting to see these tools that may allow us to, in a positive way, start to make classes more and more equitable. It's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to be natural. It's not going to be an organic progression, but it's something that we can work on and I think eventually get closer to. All right, and this is for anyone who does want to talk to me or interact with me. I don't know if you'll be able to scan this super well from there, but hopefully you will. But if you do want to talk to me, this is my business card. So it has my phone number on it. It has my email. So if you do want to interact with me or have any questions with me, feel free to do so. And thank you very much.